This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi guys, you're watching Common Sense Generation. I'm Kądzielska-Koper, and today we're going to describe for you what's going on in the French politics. With me is Dr. Lola Salem, a specialist in politics and what's going on in UK and in France. French, born in France, but educated in UK.
For my PhD, yes, but actually mostly educated in France. So I went to the École Normale Supérieure. I did 2 masters, and it's only for my PhD that I traveled on the other side of the channel.
The English channel or the La Manche?
La Manche, indeed, yes.
Of course. How did you survive the British food?
Well, it might be the most controversial thing I might say tonight, but it is actually fairly good, I think, for many reasons. Anyway, we don't have too much time to look into this, but I think since they were shamed for good reasons to death in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the food scene, especially in London, but even outside London, has renewed itself, and actually it's quite...
A national dish, curry.
Yes, it's actually okay. I like it.
A lot of changes in French politics.
Yes.
The eyes of the world, like of Europe, especially of Germany, are like looking, what the hell is going on in France? The right is winning. Le Pen is everywhere. What's going on? Where the French people are? So what's actually going on, and what are the faces of French politics right now?
So, I mean, obviously, so we are doing this interview before the final elections on Sunday, but some of the faces are recognizable from a long time ago, right? So we have what is called increasingly actually the hard right instead of the far right, the National Rally with Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella. We have an amious, familic and non-functioning right-wing party, with a variety of figures who actually didn't really go along very well. Very recently, for example, Éric Ciotti, the president of Les Républicains, so this traditional right-wing party, was in conflict with many others of his party. I mean, it was a complete cacophony and actually quite funny things, soap opera to follow. Then we have Macron, who everyone knows, and obviously Macron has done what he does best, which is a very egotistical, so-called Jupiterian move by not being very happy with the elections for the European Parliament. He decided to throw his toys out of his pram and just to call the dissolution of the Assembly, and therefore is now putting everyone in this situation where I guess he probably, I don't know, he didn't expect people to vote so vehemently on the hard right, but that is obviously the case. And then we have quite a fragmented myriad of things on the left. So we have the party from Mélenchon, which is a far left party, with a variety of things that I personally find appalling. One of them, for example, is the support for Gaza with no condition whatsoever, and the relentless attack on Israel, and including quite a few anti-Semitic comments.
Isn't it one of the chief rabbi of France said, like, France is no more a place for Jews. The Jews should leave France immediately.
Yes, it's been quite a few years that, especially from the left, this sort of very, very dreadful, completely toxic mentality about attacking Israel, which, very sorry to say, but was the victim of the October 7th attacks, to attack Israel relentlessly, to never even conceive the possibility of Israel being in its right to respond to violence. And
one thing, how you judge the Israeli politics for Palestine and Gaza, which is a very complicated problem, a long one, and even the hearts of very conservatives are somehow divided, with seeing all the rights of Israel to exist. Well, the collateral damage is also so big that it cries for somehow of resolving it. But on the other hand, when you have, but even the very left people in other countries in Europe see the fact that their Jewish citizens are their citizens. So they are French people very much, even if the Israeli origins, but they can have, very often they have nothing to do with Israel at all. They might never been to Israel, might speak like little Hebrew or even none of them at all, might a little bit practice Judaism, but after all, they are French people. Yes. And just the fact that they here they want to be, there is this ostracism so deep that it goes, this is unique in Europe.
Well, it's true that we are now at a weird place in history where, you know, the left is more naturally than the right prone to be international. So that's why I think in many ways the same discourses, the same element of the discourse are shared across countries, especially on the left. And a party that has pretended to have the monopoly of humanity and kindness and, you know, all sorts of nice little virtues is now in a place where it is, in France in particular, is often a violent party, a party that calls for people to be beaten up or to be vilified, or, you know, in many different ways. And sometimes it's just it's not just words, it actually becomes real physically. It's a party that seems to be completely fine, as you just said, to just vilify a large portion of its population, the Jewish one in particular, but also that has embraced the sort of racism against white people, for example, on the basis that it's not really racism, and we keep playing with the words and redefining them as much as we want. So it is a strange place to be, because I guess I'm still young, being 30, but I think I'm old enough to remember a time where it was not really like this, or at least not the whole of the left was like that. And I think going back to the original question about what are the figureheads, etc., the left right now has created this sort of new coalition across different parties situated on the center-left part of the political spectrum. And it's been sad to see that some people have made that coalition among each other, despite for months or even years now having protested and even campaigned on the basis that they are not like the far left in particular, that they are not anti-Semitic, that they condemn their position on Israel in particular, but also on a variety of other things, very sort of illiberal, progressive sort of mindset. And now, because, you know, people have to create this sort of cordon sanitaire against the hard right, we've seen many people who ultimately, I think until recently, were holding themselves together and at least protecting their reputation, their honesty, making a pact with a party which I genuinely don't think has the interest of every single French person at heart.
So what's actually a choice for an ordinary French person? What are supposed to? I mean, what options are there on the table for in real way? Because Le Pen seems conservative, but not on every single issue. And for Europe, especially for the eastern and central part, the one piece which totally doesn't fit to this picture is, of course, her approach to Russia. By that she seems when every normal conservative is, of course, anti-communist. Her father was for a long time, but then the figure of Putin and getting along with it, it's part of her image right now.
Yes.
So how to judge it?
Well, again, good question. In a way, just like for British elections that happen the same week, people vote, of course, for a party, but also for their local representative, right? So it's always a sort of hard choice between, do I vote for the party and send a strong signal at a national level, or do I vote for actually someone who I think has done a good job? In France, more likely actually than in the UK, although that might be debatable, people vote traditionally slightly more for a party than for a person. Again, that's a generalization, but it seems to me like it's more the case. So I guess that if you dislike the status quo, which we are seeing very much in the polls right now, you would avoid voting for Macron, although Macron now is the last one to have made this alliance with all of the parties which are broadly on the left of him. So you would try to vote for any other party from this sort of new coalition on the left.
But something against Macron down.
In a way, it's both against Macron and against the hard right. Yes, okay. Definitely. or then you would vote for the hard right. But you're right. I think, of course, Marine Le Pen has reformed her party in depth and has probably very intelligently has played a clever role in Parliament so far by voting the right amount of bills and being quite quiet and not all the time, but broadly disciplined in all of the discussions happening in the Assemblée Nationale to present herself as someone serious, someone like an adult, capable of working with the presidential majority. And in contrast, I have to say the far left have been the one being very noisy and disruptive in the Assemblée Nationale, being insulting even. So she sort of created that image of her. Now, Russia is quite a good example. Yeah, there are things that Marine Le Pen needs to explain probably a bit further. Probably Russia is not the only topic, and I completely agree. I think it is one of the elements where she does contrast a lot with other conservative, or at least right-leaning parties across Europe, and probably the fact that, you know, to be honest, I don't know her part in person, so I can't tell. So whether it is a personal connection relating her to Putin in Russia, or it is a greater signal, I don't know, but I don't think that's a very clever one.
And on the left, if we don't want to vote for Macron, so for like status quo, who we vote for then?
So of course the status quo would be straightforwardly voting for Macron, but I think, you know, Macron has been someone who was elected the first time, but especially re-elected with actually very few votes. So the second time that he got his mandate, the rate of participation for just voting was fairly low, and he got not a very high segment of the votes, basically, as a total across all of the French population. So his support from the second time that he presented himself was already lower and weaker. And we need to put things in perspective. Macron has presented himself at many occasions as a harsh figure. We can think very naturally about the yellow vest, Gilets jaunes. And perhaps there is something in that. Perhaps Macron defeated the Gilets jaunes on the ground with the police and you know, all of those very violent intercations between.
So the yellow vest.
Yes, exactly. So back in 2019, etc. Yes. And now probably, you know, and especially because COVID put sort of a natural term anyway to any sort of public protest, etc. It might be, and on that I think we need to carry so much more research, but it might be that the yellow vests are taking their revenge at the ballot box.
Interesting. So the faces of the new left, French new left, what are they?
So you might have heard of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Jean-Luc Mélenchon has been one of the most ongoing, eternal figure on the far left, and for someone who claims that, you know, politics is not a place for forever to be in, it's quite hypocritical from him to have stayed so many long decades in a position of power. There might be a few others. So, for example, Raphael Glucksmann, who's been very active for the European elections, is also one of the strong figures. The traditional Socialist Party, represented by Raphael, has been in lots of turmoil over the last few years, since, I guess, François Hollande, the Socialist president, elected a few years ago. But it has made this pact with Mélenchon, so La France Insoumise. And then you would have a variety of other figures. One of them are from the Greens, and in particular, the Greens I find absolutely despicable. So we have a variety of people there, such as Sandrine Rousseau, for example, who is I think a complete lunatic, a person who has the most crazy and vile beliefs with regard to Israel, for example, but not just that. And it shows again that this idea of the illiberal progressivism, sometimes called as woke sort of beliefs, is present everywhere. And I often say, especially to some of my friends in the UK, who think that France is sort of magically, naturally immune to these kind of things because of its language, because of its so-called love for tradition or whatever, and its own artistic, cultural past. France will resist that, or France will naturally sort of expel this from its system, and it's just not true. We can see it with Mélenchon in particular, people among the Greens and a few others across this whole political spectrum, and to be fair, even with Macron.
And what it is secularization, I guess, this is also the part of it. I watched this movie of Notre Dame in fire. Beautiful picturesque, but just showing how little knowledge French people, especially firemen, had about the treasures which were then in Notre Dame. And it was a shocker on many levels, but I think also a call for help and change, that something should change in French identity, and they should somehow go back to those, at least to Christian values. But of course, there's a huge Muslim minority in France, which becomes a political power as well, but it is also a political problem discussing all the time in all forms of this cultural battle. So for whom the Muslim minority can vote? Who is their leader? Who are they voting for?
Well, the left is capturing a large part of the Muslim electorate.
But I can't imagine that an Orthodox Muslim or even like a centrist Muslim will vote for LGBT groups or wokeism.
Well, I think you're very right to point out the paradox. I think it's a forced bargain that is made sometimes. So just to be clear, I don't think the Muslim committee is homogeneous. There are many different people. Some may vote also on the right, etc. Just a parenthesis in all of this. It's interesting to see that in the UK, it's not a given that racial minorities, for example, would vote on the left. There are many of them, especially Indians of Sikhs, for example, who've been voting traditionally on the right. So there are some differences between obviously different countries. But in France, you're right, there is this sort of paradox, very obvious paradox between, I'm a Muslim, especially Orthodox Muslim, why would I alliance myself with, get an alliance with a country that is very openly, overly liberal in some sexual, for example, topics. Well, I guess there is, as I was saying, a forced bargain from those parties who basically want to appear extremely liberal on the one hand and very sectarian on the other. The fact that, we have had over the decades, years, we've had this discourse coming from the left of trying to find a share of humanity for immigrants, especially from different minorities and different races and cultures and whatever, and we have to be even more accommodating, even more understanding, etc., which, to be fair, is in the DNA of the French Republic to be welcoming of anyone, regardless of the creed, the race, etc., which I think is a beautiful principle.
Rousseau idea.
Right, but it's actually not working in effect because it's this idea of being colorblind, or at least not looking at the specifics of someone, which in many cases that person cannot change, about perhaps religion, of course, but the fact is that it is part of a pact, a social contract, where the person genuinely wants to integrate. And it is that very notion of integration that the left has relentlessly attacked over and over, because why would you have to integrate? France is this open country. It has to remain open. It's not just in France that we see this issue. I see it very well in the UK and across other European countries. But France is really less and less in touch with its Republican past, with its traditions, and the fact that being open means also being intolerant towards intolerance. And I think ultimately part of the reasons that we see a massive shift in different directions, including the hard right, is the fact that immigration in France has been also widely correlated and well researched actually with crime. So very obvious examples of that are terrorist attacks, but on a daily basis it's very visible. So to go back to your
assaults of women, this danger of
yes.
Walking those streets of Paris alone by night, that's maybe in the city center that's all right, but the other places it might be difficult.
Absolutely.
I remember myself, I went to see all the damned kings after reading Maurice Roland, and so we went on a train, went outside to see all the tombs of the kings. We went from the train station going to the cathedral, and there was no single white person. We were the only 5 girls dressed up being tourists, and I was like, are they going to murder us, eat us up? Or this is something seriously strange. Of course, for the Central and Eastern Europe, this is a shock. For France, it seems less, but a space and integration, and just the fact that the main obligation of a state is to bring safety. That's one of the. Without safety, all other things are less important. And if it fails on this, then we can ask what's actually the purpose of the state.
Well, it's very true that we are, in the whole of political theory, if we look at some of the major figures, Hobbes seems to be very much vindicated with this idea that the state is here to protect, even to protect from each other, and to make sure that we are a coherent whole that can function all together. And in that way, John Locke is sort of pushed on the side, or even Rousseau for that matter. But again, this idea you were asking me earlier, why would an Orthodox Muslim in particular ally themselves with the left? Well, there is, I think, increasingly that idea that the left has been giving a carte blanche for many people to just basically continue this slow decline of some neighborhood, and the idea that civility is something toxic and akin to white supremacy anyway, and we need to be much more tolerant and much more, embracing relativism. And that, for people who understand truly what those things are, it's such a great opportunity for them to then little by little sow and reap something much more toxic and difficult to unroot later. So you're right to from your perspective as an Eastern European, you come to France and you just realize that there is something that has changed. And I can see it within, through my own lifetime, 30 years. I was born and raised in Paris, and it was a Paris already at the time that was not always, all pink and romantic and lovely. But the Paris I see now has nothing to do with the Paris when I was a child. And is that nostalgia? Is it misplaced romanticism or not? I don't think so. I think it's normal to care. As a conservative, it's normal to care and love about the things that, accompanied you your entire life, and where there is a valuable, substantial good in them. French culture, we were talking about earlier, is something that obviously has given so much to the rest of the world, and it's not something just random and that can be traded or whatever. It's something unique, and it is because it is
and
unique.
It was appreciated for so many European countries all over the centuries as a language of diplomacy, as a language of the courts, as a language of poetry, as a language of the artist, and also as a safe place for artists, but a safe place for those who seek freedom, especially important during for example, the partition of Poland, but into Romanticism during the times when Eastern and Central Europe needed to face with Russian occupation, and now France is totally different. But thank you so much for patronizing all this very complicated world of French politics with all those beautiful names, which are always very difficult for the rest of the world to pronounce. But it is good that you at least shed some light in it. My obvious summarize of it is like, I wouldn't like to be a French politician.
It's quite tricky. I think it's true that I think right now French politics are going to be very difficult. In a way, very exciting again to see what's going to happen. But I think you're correct. The next few years until the next presidential elections are going to be a minefield, and it's probably also one of the reasons that Jordan Bardella said very explicitly, if he doesn't have a absolute majority in those elections, he'll refuse to govern as prime minister. We'll see what he'll do, but it shows that the task is extremely complicated right now.
Complicated. Either you get another Napoleon there who will unite the country in some very strong, firm fist, or it's going to be problematic. Anyway, Lola Salem about French politics and Common Sense Generation. Thank you for showing up here.
Thank you for having me.
And to you, the viewers, I do hope that you somehow put yourself and organize a little bit more what's going on the French scale of politics in this beautiful country of such great art and great history, but with a little bit more messed up reality right now. Thank you for watching us, and again, I thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.